Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming on 4 o'clock. It cracks me up that we can all hang out at 4 o'clock and get deep into some scholarship and journalism. But before I get into my presentation, I want to thank Judy for this really gracious introduction. I want to thank Dean Cohen for bringing together us 50 or so scholars. It's really an honor, and it's been an incredible first 10 days to be together. I also want to acknowledge the incredible staff here at Radcliffe, Rebecca Haley, Meg Rotzel, who has put together the exhibition afterwards that I hope you will all join, and we'll talk a bit about it. And I'm not sure if she's here, Melanie Kamet, who has been an advisor of mine for some time when I was at Brown University, and she's still a mentor to me in the Kennedy School, so I'm really grateful that she's here. And also Carol Hills, who's a senior producer and host at The World at Public Radio. We've never met. We've been corresponding for 5 years. I've been on the show a dozen times. Thank you for coming. But really, the people I want to thank aren't here today, and these are the cartoonists I'll be talking about, because at the end of the day, I can come here and have a Radcliffe Fellowship and share all of their work, but so many of my friends and colleagues are in Cairo, in Beirut. Maybe they can't get a visa. Maybe they're limited in their travel because of funds or other reasons. So really, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here, but it's really a tribute to them and their ingenuity. So without further ado, my guiding question, my big question is why is there an Arab comics moment now, in 2017, but really the past decade? In this current contemporary context, why are comics so important in a new emerging Arab visual culture? I'll get to that, but first I want to start with a question that many of my fellows, as this dorky turn of the phrase we keep using, have asked me about, which is, what's going on in Cairo today? I think that's what all of these really fascinating new colleagues at Harvard have asked me. What is going on in Cairo? So the way I'm going to answer that is through comics, obviously. So this first one is by an artist named Shinawi. He's in his 30s. He's a founder of this incredible comic collective I'll be talking about today. But this first image is, for those of you who might have visited Cairo, pretty recognizable, the skyline, the highway, the alleys. But the key is what it says on top. You ask me, what's Cairo like these days? Here's the answer, the translation. Cairo, 60 years from now, nothing has changed. And I think that's the comic goes on to be this very kind of tongue-in-cheek graphic narrative about the comic artist 60 years and how they're decrepit and old, but they're still drawing. But I think this is a very powerful idea to think about in terms of a country that's had 4 regimes in 5 years and drastic political change. And at the end of the day, it's a city of 22 million people. It's very difficult for a city that large to change. So Cairo 60 years from now is basically what we're left with today. But that's just one comic and one perspective on how Cairo looks today. This is another, Cairo of the imagination, of the melancholia, of the, the pharaonic imaginary, the cosmopolitan imaginary, the kind of Cairo you might have seen in glossy magazines, travel magazines. And this is by a Lebanese graphic artist, Lamia Ziad. And I think in this image, we could start to see just how cinematic comics can be, and they can sort of create imaginary or unworldly worlds. But they can also produce very real worlds. This is a comic by a very introverted graphic artist named Mohammed Waba Shinawi, different than the first Shinawi. And he has this incredible lens that, I mean, look how detailed if any of you have visited Cairo, you can imagine being stuck in this traffic. You can imagine waiting 4 hours to get to the restaurant you're trying to get to for dinner. This is the Nile. This is the Cairo Tower. This is about 10 minutes from where I've been living for the past 5 years. And this kind of freakishly detailed cityscape captures the intense urbanism and movement of Cairo in a way that I think only a comic can do. Now, obviously, it's just a frame, but I'm giving you a taste of everything. Or the totally simplified, the stick figure. This is by Islam Gawish. He's an ultra-viral web creator. He has, last I checked, 12 or 13 million followers on Facebook. And he's known for these sardonic stick figures. And if you can imagine this massive city, this is how he sees one street's chaos in the midst of whether it's protest or revolution. And in spite of it being so simple, the details are incredible. He's walking over a dead body. There's people being beat up on one side. On the other side is further chaos. And the stick figure, perhaps like the artist himself, just kind of strolls along like, what can you do? Now, just as a brief aside, and gesturing towards what Judy was saying, Gawish spent a night in prison in 2016 for his barb against allegedly Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the military president, but you never know, and this is one of the great mysteries of an autocratic state, why he landed in prison, but we'll get more to that later. And so what's going on in Cairo? Well, they're laughing at us, is another answer to that question. This is by the artist Diala Otto. She's perhaps the most prominent female cartoonist in the country, which is no small feat, considering even in the American context or European context is a very patriarchal, male-dominated field. And she has distinguished herself as an award-winning cartoonist, but also very bold. She's gotten death threats from political Islamists. She's been sued, et cetera, et cetera. So what I like to say is that in terms of the political moment we're experiencing in America, I mean, the Egyptian cartoonists get it. They've seen this movie before. They've drawn their Sisis and their Mubaraks and their Morsis and everybody, and this is just more great material. So they're laughing at us. But I would also maybe use comics to explain to you more broadly the political situation. So we like to think of Egypt as in this pharaonic world that obviously is quite an imagined identity, and I'm not here to tell you, I'm sure we have incredible ancient historians among us who could tell us that it's not a direct line between the pharaohs, but it's an important part of Egyptian national identity, and I think this is a really brilliant way to explain the political scene that far surpasses any op-ed or research article that I could write. And perhaps one that even brushes, obviously this is quite a, making fun of the police and making fun of authority, but I want to show you one that even maybe pushes further against those red lines. And this is a scathing indictment of the Egyptian state. This is a family covered in blood, and it says the souvenir portrait of the great Egyptian family. A cartoonist named Andil, who's about 32, he posted this days, not months, not weeks, not years, days after the military coup that upended Egyptian democracy in July 2013. So while much of the country was singing with the national chorus of a great military savior who's overcome political Islamists or the Muslim Brotherhood, it was only a cartoonist could serve as an ombudsman in this visually aggressive way and say, look, you're all smiling, but really we have blood on our hands and our faces, and et cetera. So again, this is, again, moving towards the political red lines, which I'll talk about a bit later. But the point I really want to make here is that cartoonists are often this kind of canary in the coal mine moment. And while now, 2016, 2017, many cartoonists have come out against Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the president, former general, we have cartoonists who are doing it day 3, 4 of the coup, which is pretty outrageous. And it's not without pushback. This is a Facebook meme that I think sums up the state of digital surveillance or technology in Egypt, which is this great contradiction that social media has opened up whole worlds. Any cartoonist or person with Photoshop can create an incredibly powerful image with a stinging political relevance. However, with that comes surveillance and lack of privacy and activists and journalists being monitored. It started in May in earnest that the Egyptian government blocked 150 websites, including the website where Andil draws for, Mada Masr, a leading independent news resource in Egypt. It's now over 400, including websites like the Human Rights Watch's Arabic edition, a number of news, even financial news sites, of course Al Jazeera, which has been demonized. I'm not going to get too detailed into this particular spectrum of censorship. I just wanted to say this is not an easy place to be a cartoonist, and particularly in this emerging digital realm. At the same time, print is really important. And there's a cohort of really talented and incredibly funny, I think, cartoonists who work daily in newspapers, like Anwar, who's drawn this that I think really captures the ambiguousness of censorship in Egypt, because it's not like one might imagine, a man in a suit and a tie and a red pen crossing out cartoons. It's more of a crafty cartoonist at the corner, and maybe certain people are unhappy with his work. Maybe he'll get away. Maybe he'll be coerced. Maybe he'll have to leave the country. It's a very ambiguous sphere. And I think it's particularly interesting that private newspapers, like the one that's publishing his work, are willing to go that extra length and produce cartoons that are incredibly bold in their visual language, obviously, and also in their political message. But these red lines are, as I say, enforced very haphazardly. So that's going to be one of the topics I'll be continuing to raise. So here they are. Let me introduce them to you. These are some of the so-called mad cartoonists, as I've titled today's talk. And these are just a handful of them. Some of their works I just showed you. Others I didn't have such beautiful photographs of, so I didn't include. These are, by the way, Benedict Evans. He's an incredibly talented portrait photographer who I worked with in Cairo. These mad cartoonists of Cairo are using their pens to redraw the lines of acceptable speech, and they often face resistance. So why do I call them mad? Well, yesterday I had the honor of sitting through Art Spiegelman, one of the most talented comic artists of the past generation, speak. And he spoke about how deeply influenced he was by Harvey Kurtzman's Mad magazine. So I feel like, okay, I had a good title now. So there's three reasons why I like to call these the mad cartoonists. First of all, they're mad at the status quo. I mean, as you look at many of the more politically inflected cartoons, they're incredibly bold, and there's no holes barred. Second, they are, although not directly influenced by Mad magazine, are influenced maybe by the generation after the original Mad. So they're part of this comic collectives that are quite raunchy and outrageous and experimental. So I do think they fit into this kind of Mad magazine genre of alternative comics. And for those of us who are more analytical or science-minded, I'll define all my definitions when I get a little further. But yes, so these are quite bold comic artists. And they're mad at the status quo, and they're defiantly, they're mad to be so defiantly flouting of taboos. And I think that's the thing, is you'd have to be mad to be a cartoonist in this environment. And yet, I've met dozens of them, and they're incredibly creative. If they hit a roadblock, they will work around it and find a way to draw CC or find a way to mock whomever. And they're really this avant-garde network of artists working in Cairo, but as I'll talk about a bit later, they're part of a bigger constellation of artists throughout the Middle East and North Africa, and increasingly connected to colleagues in America and Europe and Asia. Now, the most kind of clear expression of alternative comics, as we'll call them, comics for adults, is this magazine called Tuk Tuk. Now, this is the first image I showed you as well of Cairo 60 years from now. So Tuk Tuk is a horizontal collective of artists. They serendipitously launched their somewhat quarterly periodical 2 weeks before the 2011 uprising. So it begins to show the parallel of how art and politics, work in tandem, if not directly connected. And they're deeply linked to Egyptian art institutions, to regional institutions. And I want to say above all, and I've just said all this heady stuff about how they fight red lines and are persistently audacious, but they actually have a lot of fun. They host great openings. They host great get-togethers. This is really a creative insurgency, and it's a lot of fun to research and be a part of. And here are some more images of Cairo that I think begin to capture what the city of 22 million has to offer in terms of daily life, the minutiae, the corners, the alleys, where you would leave your trash out for the garbage men. And this is why Tuk Tuk is so unique. Cairo is a very class-based city. Egypt's a very class-based society. These are liminal spaces. These are not spaces that get foregrounded in daily newspapers. So for someone to to drawing comics that really spotlights what it is to live in a lower to middle class neighborhood of urban parts of Cairo is also a very political statement. Now the name Tuk Tuk, which you can see here for Arabic readers, it's a three-wheeled rickshaw. So the urban sensibility is deeply embedded into the publication. They're kind of like really cheap taxis only available in what in Cairo would call the popular neighborhoods, which is in fact the poorer neighborhoods. So I think the common thread here, and when I'm talking about how things work in parallel, how sort of the revolution happened and these comics started, this is on the eve of the 2013 coup, and they put out this issue that, as I say, foregrounds this urban sensibility. So it's again, I want to start raising these questions. So this is the piece that I hope you can join at the exhibition later. I'll be showing by an artist named Shinawi. I think it has an incredible rhythm for us comic scholars here. The lighting is really special, the way he's used different shades and hues to capture Cairo's light pollution. It's also a very everyman story. This is this gentleman up here. He's a car parker. He's a valet. And each issue, he kind of experiences some kind of absurd circumstances. And I'm going to end the talk with the most absurd. But just in this one, he finds a young Chinese girl in an alley in Cairo and decides to take her home. But you kind of see Cairo through this young girl's eyes. She's maybe never been in the city. She doesn't know why she's there. And you just get these glimpses of urban life. So, but the thing that seems to be the undertone of everything I'm saying is just how difficult it is to be a comic artist today in Egypt. And I wanted to draw your attention to some of the kind of the pro-government, rah-rah, pro-Sisi hysteria to show you just how powerful the works that I've just previewed are. This is how the pro-state official newspapers show President Sisi driving literally the ship of state through the Suez Canal, very handsome. Here he's on the cover of a children's magazine, kind of grinning. I like that they've added some friendly faces there. Versus this image, which was posted on Facebook by a 20-something-year-old military conscript named Amr Nohan. Amr Nohan is now serving in prison for posting this on Facebook. This appeared in a newspaper of Sisi sitting on a journalist's head. These are some of the more bold critiques of him. Sisi on the psychiatric couch, or an incredible Facebook meme of the Mickey Mouse. I wanted to show you this slide to make sure it's clear that these mad cartoonists are outliers. And since Sisi took power, ostensibly in 2013 and then through an election in 2014, the comic discourse has shifted considerably, day to day sometimes. If there's a terror attack, if there's an election, the rules of the game might change for a short period or in earnest. But on Deal, this cartoonist who drew Sisi playing with action figures and kind of totally a rambunctious approach to this president, he told me this, quote, "I don't want my work to only be interesting because of dictatorship, because this, again, is giving dictatorship so much size and importance. I hate when people see cartoonists as exotic, the expression of freedom fighters in the Middle East." So I always want to bring in that kind of his dismissiveness or his natural approach to this to show that, although this looks like a very intense political act, many of these cartoons, they're kind of just day-to-day life. I mean, people have chosen their career to be cartoonists. And at the same time, the stakes could not be higher. Just this week, it's very tragic, and it's hard to even think about, that the lawyer, a human rights advocate, a lawyer in Cairo, who works on forced disappearances, there's tens of thousands of people in Egyptian prisons, we don't know why, probably for political affiliations that are unsavory. The lawyer working on forced disappearance was forcibly disappeared. His name's Abdul Munim Matwali Hegazi. And I think this point of absurdity is where the comic artists come in. I mean, it's very difficult to make a joke about something that is that real or that visceral. But in fact, that's exactly the job of artists, I think, in this context. And Facebook posters. threw this one in of CC as George Costanza, because I think this is, online discourse, or in the context of print, is an incredibly powerful way to attack a regime that's disappearing thousands of people. And Egypt is, last I checked, the third worst jailer of journalists in the world after China and Turkey. Now, cartoonists are not always considered journalists, but many are members of the journalist syndicate. There's innumerable risks facing them. So what are the red lines? And there's no really direct answer to this question because, as I say, they shift from period to period. I've done extensive research on Mubarak's red lines from 1981 to 2011 and how that shifted during a military junta period, then during Morsi, then during Sisi, and then how even each year of Sisi can change. But broadly speaking, punching up or punching down, two things we've thought about in the American context. Punching up, in this context, being insulting the president, which is illegal, insulting the parliament, the judiciary, the military, a number of other state institutions. But as I mentioned before, it is all very haphazardly enforced, so it's all part of the game. And I just wanted to, this slide was also my opportunity to tell you a little about my approach, because I'm approaching this as a journalist. I'm not a scholar of comics. I'm not a political scientist. So I like to tell people stories. I like to profile them. I like to think about why they're making these choices, the audiences they're reaching. But I'm also not an anthropologist, so I don't go sit in cafes and do reception analysis. I don't do content analysis. I don't do any of these one techniques. I'm trying to bring it all together in stories that share, I think, these incredibly brave people's works. So I conduct my research at late-night street cafes, on university campuses, secondhand bookstalls, newspaper offices, museums, antique shops, galleries, salons, book launches, festivals, workshops, conferences, symposias, openings, and quite crucially, closings. Because when a place closes here, we think it's, oh, the exhibition's closed for after a month of showing, but there's been many cases in Egypt where institutions have been closed down, where publications have been closed down. The key point, and this is something that's emerged from 5 years of my writing, is that all of this censorship, all of this pressure, all of this stress, I think it actually empowers artists. And it's very counterintuitive, and it's not necessarily makes sense on paper, but you hear this in Andil's voice about how he thinks he's bigger than dictatorship. You see this in the persistent defiance, and I'll get into the deep history shortly. I think all of these things together make cartoonists more committed to the cause. So, and I just wanted to mention the risks are incredibly real. This is a Palestinian cartoonist who was gunned down in, I put 88, I apologize, 87 in London. And the case is still unresolved. But it's also part of a century-long tradition. And it shows just, what's at stake. I wanted to make that clear to you who aren't working in this field or aren't thinking about the political aspects of comics obsessively, like me and a couple of my friends who are here. Why is it that regimes are threatened by cartoons? Why are interest groups calling in death threats? Why are Islamist groups bringing lawsuits against cartoonists? The fact is that all of those people are thinking about how to coerce cartoonists into changing their perspective means that we as a general audience and readership and interested people, we should be thinking about what cartoonists are doing also. So this is a quick note on my Herculean feat. I'm Superman, but the villain is much bigger than me. And I'm trying to take all of these ideas and write a book about them while I'm here at Radcliffe. So that's going to be difficult, but as I've described, I have a pretty good idea of my argument and my approach about how all these difficulties, in fact, galvanize cartoonists to make their craft even stronger. And, but since I'm a journalist, I come across all of these weird characters and personalities. And it's not just a straight-up history, although that's what I'm very excited about. But since no one's actually written the history of Arab comics, although there's been bits and pieces along the way, I've sort of forced to almost survey that history. So let me first give you a taste of my secret weapon, and then I'll give you a little bit of that history. So my secret weapon is my archive. And I have hundreds of old magazines from the 20s and 30s all the way through today, and books. So this was my desk over the weekend trying to write this talk. This is Mickey Mouse magazine in support of Gamal Abdel Nasser, the great nationalist leader of Egypt. This is Mickey Mouse making fun of Yemen. This is a ripoff of Tintin from the 60s. These are magazines from the teens and the 20s that have really early caricatures. So, and this is me digging through stacks of it. It's a terrible photo, but I just wanted to give you a sense of just, I have access to book dealers who have these archives. And Egypt's a difficult place to work in libraries and to get official permission. So I've actually created my own archive out of antique shops, although I didn't buy this because it was $10,000. It was an original cartoon banner from the 20s that was used in a political demonstration. These are book stalls that I peel through, and digital archives, galleries, graffiti. These are all sort of sites of my research, and part of it's trying to tie it all together. But the thing I also wanted to share with you, because we are at the Radcliffe Institute, is Little Lulu in Arabic. Because for those of you who don't know, Radcliffe has this incredible library and collection. Among it are the full papers of the artist Marjol Bu of Little Lulu. And funny enough, she was born in 1935. By 1965, 66, translated into Arabic. And again, Art Spiegelman yesterday said he learned feminism from Little Lulu. So I don't know if that's a bit of a stretch, but I think many of us learned feminism from another character who Jill Lepore wrote so brilliantly about, The Secret History of Wonder Woman. Now, I've learned that Wonder Woman barely appeared in Arabic. I don't know why. Maybe it's political. Maybe it's just an accident. Maybe it's one of those weird things that Lulu is super popular in Arabic, but you can't find other random characters in translation. So I just wanted to acknowledge also that much of the Wonder Woman story was written and happened here in Cambridge, here on Brattle Street. So it's cool to be a part of that history and also to be writing my own secret history of comics. So what does children's comics have to do with my research? I'm still figuring out exactly how it fits into the book, but you have this medium that's always been childish and immature in the context of the Arab world, and it's only in the last decade or so that comics are really coming out for adults. So, and in fact, there's new comics for kids, like this adventure story that's kind of sci-fi, neo-pharaonic, that is obviously very informed by some of these children's comics. So, as I said, because no one's really written this history, I'm just going to give you a quick 1-2 of the history of Arab comics, or why Disney has been teaching young Egyptians to smoke hookah since 1963. I want to recognize a mentor of mine, Elliot Kola, who's a previous Radcliffe Fellow. I showed him this slide recently. He's at Georgetown. And he pointed out that, well, this is a hookah. This is well known. This is just for hashish. What was this? Why was this on the cover of a children's magazine? And I don't know. This is part of the, I've acquired all of this incredible material. A couple academic articles have been written about this topic, but I don't know who the artist of this is, this cover. Many of the covers are not acknowledged. So yeah, I'm really here to think about this secret history. But I buried the lead for you because I'm a bad journalist. The first cartoonist in the Arab world was a Jew. This is the work of Jakob Stern. He was working in the late 19th century in Cairo. He was an anti-imperialist crusader, an anti-government crusader, spoke more languages than I could probably count, and ended up having to flee to France because of his anti-government cartoons in the 1880s. But he still would smuggle these. This is the head of Egypt at the time, the Ottoman leader, the Khedive. He was skewering him, drawing him as a pharaoh. So it's this really rich tradition that I like to show, that want to make sure people know this wasn't born out of the Arab Spring. There's a really rich indigenous comic culture that permeates all aspects of print media. And he was hugely influential. He also wrote the first plays in Amiya, or Egyptian dialect, so published a huge amount of satirical magazines and publications. And by the 20s and 30s, there's a lot of humor magazines in Egypt. And this is a political poster that obviously uses caricature. And some scholars are working on this right now, and they're exploring these brief historical moments. And it's terrific scholarship in terms of using comics and visual culture to explain the 20s and 30s in Egypt in a broader post-Ottoman way. But very few people have thought about how Tom and Jerry came to Egypt. Now, this is from a very early children's magazine in Arabic, started in 1952, which is also an important year for Cairo. 1952 is when the Free Officers movement, a group of young military officers, overthrew the monarch and started the new Egyptian Republic. So it's also very interesting that, although not directly related, that in this moment of political change, you would want to have a children's magazine to explain what is the ethos, what should young children be thinking about morally, what should they know about politically. And of course, the artists just stole the best characters from the US. As an aside, this was always Yasser Arafat's favorite comic, Tom and Jerry, because the mouse always won. So, and then, as I said, Mickey Mouse has also been a part of Egyptian culture. This is already, 75 years. And I think it's fascinating because we might think of Disney characters as symbols of capitalism or, cultural imperialism or what have you. But really, Mickey has been fully integrated into Egyptian culture. These are all local covers of the Disney affiliate in the Arab world, which was based in Cairo from the 60s. And I mean, very pharaonic. This is a kind of joke about the Persian Gulf or the Arab Gulf. Different folkways expressed. Now you have the image of him smoking a hookah to add to that. But yeah, I'm very interested in how, he became a very local character. You see Mickey Mouse now painted on preschools and elementary schools throughout Cairo. I wish I had more time to get into the deep history right now. I'm going to take us way far in the future. But I just wanted to show you, so there's this rich history of children's comics, and then it's taken up by artists for adults and comics for adults, starting in the 80s and 90s in Beirut. But in terms of the Mad Cartoonists of Cairo, I want to bring us up to 2007 and 2008, when an artist called Magdi El-Shefai, who was drawing for a prominent opposition newspaper, tried his hand at drawing a graphic novel. And this is the first graphic novel in Egypt. I mean, it's a very big deal when you think about this was happening in America in the 60s and 70s. And this is an entirely new medium. It's written in really rich, dirty slang. There's quite a bit of obscenities. And I guess none of us should be surprised that all the copies of this publication, Metro, were confiscated upon its release. It wasn't widely circulated in Arabic till about 4 years ago, and is available in translation if you'd like to read it. It's a searing indictment of the Mubarak regime. This is drawn in the last several years of Mubarak's 31-year rule. It's about the impunity with which thugs operate, with which businessmen control a kind of crony capitalist system. And this young protagonist, who's in his 30s or 20s, a computer programmer, is driven to the brink. So I'm just going to read for you the first line of it, because I think it's incredibly powerful. Today, I decided to rob a bank. I don't remember when I became so angry. All I know is that everyone was always going one way, and I was going the other. All I had on my side was my brain, so now my brain has a plan, and I'm going to make it work. And this gentleman goes on to use his computer skills to rob a bank, kind of secretly through wire transfers. And of course, this is the idea of him being mad, really angry at the status quo. But I was reading the New York Times a couple weeks ago. There was an article about, subsidized cooking gas, removing subsidies from cooking gas, removing subsidies that are really crunching a lot of Egyptians, millions of Egyptians. And there was a quote from a woman in the Times, "We don't know what to do. Do they want us to rob a bank?" I thought that was pretty impressive that this graphic novel, a decade later, is still kind of almost predictive in these issues. But what I'm actually talking about is not just about the Mad Cartoonists of Cairo. It's a regional phenomenon. And Tunisia, Morocco, and Lebanon, which has been a primary site of Comix, have had an outpouring of creative interventions. And I know here I'm mixing together cartoonists and comic artists and graphic narratives and graphic novelists. I promised that I would define all these for you, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to say all these people are working in hybrid forms. These magazines will have one-frame comics. They'll have strips. They'll have postcard-style drawings. They're a total mishmash of all sorts of graphic forms. So I think it's interesting to start thinking beyond those labels in terms of what these really beautiful productions are. And these are about, I think, 17 issues of this Lebanese comic zine since 2007. The Tunisian version is just emerging in the past 2 years or so. And I think what's noteworthy is these are all done by collectives. These aren't individuals. These are kind of the anti-hierarchical, anti-regime in their makeup even. And in a very similar way to kind of Raw and Zap and even Mad Magazine, these are groups of artists. These aren't just one single person that makes these publications come together. So is it political escapism, though? Are comics just a way to run away from the bigger problems of the day? And after all, I've told you about the lawyer who works on disappearances being disappeared, the tens of thousands in prison. I mean, is Cairo just so bleak? Is it so disturbing? I mean, what can cartoonists do that us and other professional fields can't? So the one thing I've noticed totally unique to Cairo, and I mean, okay, totally unique is an exaggeration, but the defining characteristic of Egyptian comics is something that is, can only be said is black humor. The mobilization of gallows humor literally in the aftermath of an attack, literally while the smoke is rising from a terror attack. Cartoonists are willing to make a joke. And this is something I think it's illegal in France to probably say this. Je suis Koichi, the killers of Charlie Hebdo. I think no one in America would have the gall to post this or publish this in the immediate aftermath of an attack. But here we are, 1 month later in Cairo, after the heinous Charlie Hebdo attack in Paris of January 2015. And Egyptian cartoonists are they're well-versed in dealing with blasphemy laws and terror attacks, and they're willing to come out and make a joke straight away. And I think this goes back to the red lines idea, because in America we have red lines that we don't always think about because they're not legally enshrined, but it would be considered in very bad taste to make, jokes about 9/11 on 9/11. Whereas here we have a pretty bold joke about ISIS that came out, not long after ISIS had been founded. And pardon me, Chief, has my head rolled through here. And this is the ISIS. It just says ISIS, Daesh, and this just says barbershop. It's like, what's going on here? And this is but one example of many that walk that fine line of bad taste or irreverence. And this is how to survive a chemical warfare attack by a Jordanian cartoonist. So it's not singular to Egypt, but it is definitely, Egypt's the center of this black humor. And in Jordan, this is how you survive a chemical attack. And, but you might end up like this anyway, even if. Now, this came out right when the Obama administration was grappling with how to reply or respond to the Assad regime's alleged use of chemical weapons in Syria. This is pretty bold. And there were no American cartoonists making jokes about unconventional warfare in this moment. And here's one that I often think about because it's an incredible bravado to publish this. Sir, just pay for the parking spot before you explode the car. Best wishes for Ramadan. This is This was in a major newspaper with the circulation of hundreds of thousands. And this came out days after the targeted assassination and an explosion, a car explosion, of the Prosecutor General of Egypt, the Attorney General, was killed. The highest level terror attack in terms of an assassination in Egyptian history since Sadat's killing. And this is what cartoonists are saying the next day. So what's going on here? This is basically one of the questions I want to work on this year. Where does black humor fit into the tricks of the trade of cartoonists in Egypt? But the primary thing I want to say is that it's a way to symbolically attack and even level the playing field with terrorists who have their own assorted weapons and means of coercion. But cartoonists retain their power to punch back and to make fun of craven killers. And of course, it's not just unique to making fun of ISIS, it's also making fun of the government itself and how they reply to these terror attacks. And this one is another explosion? Okay then, prepare a nationalistic song, pronto. This again appeared in this major newspaper. I think this is in light of the really heinous church attacks that have become a really disturbing trend in Cairo, and not in Cairo primarily, in the outskirts of Cairo and across Egypt. But yeah, this is how this cartoonist responded. So I'm going to close with the same artist I began with, Shanawi, back to his car parker. And now I just realized we have a car parker here. So I guess for those of you who are not familiar with Cairo, terrible traffic, and you often give someone a buck or two to park your car, not unlike any other city. So this car parker is a recurring character, as I said, in every issue of this zine. And so we have these cars coming. We've got these really nice pickup trucks and SUVs coming into Cairo. And our car parker friend is he's parking them. He's doing everything. He's doing his job. He's hoping for a big tip. Except it's the founder of ISIS, al-Baghdadi, and ISIS has come to town. It's not normal SUVs, and it ends with our car parker being beheaded. Is it gory? Is it distasteful? Is it absurd? Or is this how we can get back at ISIS and regain our dignity or regain our, what we have that's different than these societies? I don't know. This all emerges from my research and my interviews with these artists, but I just think they're pretty mad for doing it, and I'm really honored to be sharing their work with you today. So thank you.